All right, a bit to get across, bringing in the Daily Telegraph's National Affairs Editor, of course Sky News host James Morrow, and Sky News Senior Canberra reporter Trudy McIntosh. Welcome to you both. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a dodgy throat, but we'll get through the show. The PM's in the Cook Islands, as we saw there, Trudy. A lot of the Pacific nations are wanting more climate funding. Well, no surprises there. That's long been an objective, and we usually roll over. More ambitious climate policies. So I think that announcement on agriculture today was done very deliberately. But we learned from that report yesterday, that aid data report, that as well as our billions, our neighbours in the Pacific are also taking billions from China. So what do we think will come out of the meeting?
Well, it's interesting. This is, as you say in your editorial, Peter, this is about trying to ensure that the Pacific nations turn to Australia rather than China. And it's hard for us to compete on the money front, if you're frank. China's just able to throw more money at this, and they hope that that means that countries are more willing to look towards them. Interesting to see who's not going to this Pacific Islands Forum. As you say, the New Zealand Prime Minister is at home. He's dealing with coalition negotiations, so he's not going to be there. Also, the head of the Solomon Islands, the Prime Minister there, Sogavare, he's the concern in terms of links with China, and he's also deciding not to attend this. So there was a potential off-ramp if the PM didn't want to go, but as you say, it is important that he's there. This is our most important region, our near neighbours. But as for the travel, it doesn't stop. He's coming home for a few days, and then he's going to APEC in San Francisco. I'll be on the plane this time next week with him, Peter, heading to be there for that crucial APEC meeting too.
Goodness me. I mean, James, this is a two-part question to you. This is really starting to bite politically. It's coming up unprompted in polling groups, I'm told. I hear people as I get around the city talking about it, again, unprompted. But also, I reckon it's a bit rich for him to turn up in the Pacific and say to all of them, you know, you've got to be careful about China. Don't get seduced by their money or their power. He's just come from China. He looks pretty seduced by both trade dollars, and comments like this from the Chinese Premier. Have a listen.
I see on social media of China that there are many sharing of short videos about your trip to China, including the video of you running along the Huangpu River with a yellow jersey. People were saying that we have a handsome boy coming from Australia.
I mean, handsome boy, seriously. This is all done deliberately. Come in spinner, he falls for it.
Well, Peter, you know what? I'll tell you what. I hadn't actually watched that clip. I'd read it, but I hadn't actually watched it until you played it here. I tell you what, Anthony Albanese, Peter, strikes me as a very cheap date here, because he has fallen for the oldest trick in the book, this sort of flattery, you know, and we don't know all the different ways in which China is going to take advantage of this, because it feels very much like Albanese is much more interested, and I think this has always been a Labour issue when it comes to foreign policy. They see it solely through the prism of domestic politics and domestic headlines. So he thinks he's gotten some wins on wine and lobster. He had Don Farrell holding crustaceans up in Shanghai the other day. Great. But, you know, what is this actually going to wind up meaning for Australia, for our security, for our economy? And I really just worry that they're laughing at the PM in Beijing now.
Oh, exactly right. And any time there's going to be a skirmish in the future, they'll just take the lobsters or any other trade red wine off the table until such time as we kowtow and they put it back on again. This is the way it's been the pattern in recent years, particularly under Xi. Let's go to that issue, if we can, in New South Wales, Trudy. The planned blockade of an Israeli transport ship at Port Botany this Saturday. The Premier, Chris Minns, he's been pretty forceful. He says you can't stop trade. This, of course, is in the backdrop of those Opera House protests that went so badly in Sydney, I think badly for the government as well. There are laws now in relation to protesters blocking roads and ports. 2 years in prison, they say, fines of up to $22,000. Given we've barely seen an arrest in New South Wales over anti-Semitism, what do you think is likely to happen on the weekend?
Well, the police certainly have plenty of notice for this one, don't they? It's not until Saturday, and it's been widely telegraphed now. So the police have time to prepare for this. So you can't imagine we're actually going to see a disruption at the Port of Botany on Saturday. But it's just another problem ahead of Christmas. Think about, there's already potential for union strikes at the port, which we always seen year after year in terms of just delaying supply chains getting into the country. So look, I don't think it's actually going to disrupt them, given how much notice they've given, but it seems like one of those things that just keeps popping up right across the country, these sort of protests.
What do you think, James? I mean, they can't do anything much, it seems, about pro-Palestinian, anti-Semitic activism, but they look like they're ready to weigh in on the ports. I mean, I think they should weigh in on the ports, but I also think they've got to tackle the other stuff too.
Well, I mean, Peter, this is a real sort of, very Australian phenomenon, isn't it? Where it's only when you can figure out some way to put an economic figure, a dollar figure on it, can you get any action from anybody on anything. So everything is seen through that prism. But I'll tell you what, Chris Minns, I think, and particularly his police, have been really disappointing on this up until now. This morning I saw a young man riding an e-scooter in New South Wales being harassed by police because e-scooters are illegal here. And I said, to myself, if that guy was holding a Palestinian flag, they would have let him do whatever he wanted and go wherever he wanted, because that's the precedent that got set with those protests at the Opera House, which the police have now said, oh, we wouldn't have done anything differently, we couldn't stop them. And it just feels like there's a real rule of law problem here when you have people right after a terrorist attack celebrating a Hamas massacre. That's what they were doing. Israel hadn't done anything in response yet, so we have to be very clear about that again. This is what we're talking about here, and I think the Minns government really needs to think about what it's going to do, not just about this ship, which is great, but also, stopping this sort of thing in the future and saying, no, the police determine who marches and when, and if you're a bunch of thugs who want to celebrate Hamas and light off flares at the Opera House, well, you know what? The police are going to put their bodies on the line and stop you.
Trudy, I'm going to talk to a tech expert in a moment about this whole Optus breakdown today. But I was thinking of Michelle Rowland. I mean, it is unusual that the minister was forced out today to fill the vacuum, given there was a complete absence of leadership from Optus. She, I think, acquitted herself well, Michelle Rowland. And I remember when I spoke to her not so long ago that she intimated that misinformation, disinformation bill is likely to be moved on in the parliament, hopefully, she says, before Christmas. Now, I'm not saying it'll be passed, but do you have an update? We've only got 2 sitting weeks left before the end of the year.
Oh, there's no way. How can that pass before the end of the year in terms of getting through the Senate? The opposition.
No, I'm not saying pass. I'm saying being moved on.
Oh, introduced. Yeah, I imagine it'll be introduced if she said she's going to do it. But yeah, it's going to be controversial, Peter. I know the opposition have big problems with this. It gets kicked into a Senate committee. There's certainly a lot in her portfolio in terms of big action she's promised before the end of the year. There's a big one when it comes to things that affects Foxtel in particular. They're worried about, I've forgotten the word, prominence legislation. So she's addressing the press club, I think, later this month, and going to be announcing a few of the big policies still to come in her area before Christmas.
All right, terrific. Thank you for all of that, Trudy and James.